Welcome to another episode of Your Extraordinary Growth. I'm your host, Michael Buzinski, and today I'm talking with Anthony Winston III, who is the founder of Winston Engineering Incorporated. His firm provides HVAC, electrical, and plumbing engineering construction permit plans for all types of buildings. Anthony also has a passion for community-based projects, such as mental health facilities and affordable multifamily housing that transforms the lives of those in his surrounding communities. Welcome to the show, Anthony.
Thank you for having me.
Now, I just learned that you are an international company and you have offices both in the United States and in Canada. Anywhere else?
No, that's it. That's it.
Oh, no, just that. Just those two countries, Now, you founded this engineering company back in 2015, correct?
Correct.
Awesome. So what drove you to start your own engineering firm?
It it's something that was on my mind, not necessarily an engineering firm, but it was on my mind to start my own company. Um, I just had bad experiences with previous companies. As an intern for a big, I can't name the company, but they're pretty massive, right? 100,000 employees, I would imagine. But um, as an
Mm.
intern in college, I got laid off, and like there was no explanation. Just like, oh, all the interns are gone. And at that point, I realized that the only way that I can prevent that from happening is if I do my own thing. And I never really
Mm.
formulated in my head how that was going to happen. And then, years passed by, and one of the first companies I worked for is a large missile defense company. And I remember they gave the financial statement, if you will, of the company. And I kind of stood up in my big cubicle farm and was like, I hope to do this, maybe a very small, tiny part of it, but why not do this for myself? And so I started experimenting with a few other companies and eventually moved to California, or back to California, I should say. And I got my PE license. So that's my professional engineering license, which is based primarily in construction. And so I took a pay cut and worked for an electrical contractor so that I could fully understand electrical plans. I'm an electrical engineer by trade. And
Gotcha.
once I saw the plans, I'm like, this is a lot easier than missile and radar systems and submarine hatches and things like that. So I googled how do you start a business, and while commuting on the train, um, I literally started Winston Engineering.
Awesome. I love it though. You're sitting I can only imagine a cubicle farm. I have never had the displeasure of working in a cubicle farm. I guess the closest was the call center of what was then called Bastium Tickets, is now called Ticketmaster. When I was a teenager in the call center that I worked in, that was about as close. But we didn't have our individual cubicles, there's just rows of phones is how they used to do it
Yeah.
back in the day. I'm dating myself. And but I looked at that and I never thought of it that way, but I could just imagine like an Office Space-esque scene of you standing up with your
Very,
hand
very,
up in the
very
air.
much so. And having a boss come in asking for TPS reports.
That's a thing, isn't it? It's like a real thing. I
Yeah.
just heard about those. A client of mine was talking about it from their previous uh, career, and I'm like, that is amazing. That's an actual thing. So, well, congratulations for getting out of the matrix of, if you will, of just being another cog in the wheel. I think that it's a calling to be a entrepreneur. Not everybody can do it, right? So I
Mhm.
feel it's a privilege. And like you said, even if you can do just a little bit of what you've seen in the mass scopes of these mega companies, I honestly think that the small, medium-sized businesses are what drive the United States. I'm not sure about Canada, but I can only imagine with a small country like that, the economy really relies, the health of it relies on the folks in the middle, right?
Yeah.
Micro businesses are great, but it's those small to medium sized firms and organizations that really drive job growth. I think there's a uh, a statistic that says something right around 64% of all, maybe 67% of all new jobs are created by small to medium sized businesses. So, how many employees do you have now? You started as just you in 2015. We're up to.
Yeah, so started out just doing everything by myself, the typical kind of solo entrepreneur, marketing, the finances, the engineering, the answering the phone, everything. And my first hire, a gentleman came to me and said, "Hey, I want to be an intern." And he's an Army vet, Purple Heart, became an electrician once he got out of the military, then decided to go to school to be an electrical engineer. So he was in school at the time, and I told him, "Hey, go learn Revit. That's a program that we use." I didn't expect him to do it, and he came back about a few weeks later and said, "Hey, I've been working on this." And so I gave him a little quick test, and he kind of stumbled through it a little bit. And I said, "You know what? You're hired." Like there was just something about him, and that was in 2016, I think it was. And now he's
Mm-hmm. Okay.
our director of MEP. And as time progressed, started hiring admin. Now we have mechanical engineers. And so now we have a full staff of 7 in the US and another 2 in Canada.
Nice. Walk us through this. Not a lot of people look outside of the country. I've done business in Canada and have friends in Canada, but I always tell my folks like we're an American based company, and there's plenty of business for what I do in America. So if it lands on my plate, yes, but it's not what we're going after. So I want to hear from you. How does a firm like yours venture out to have offices in other countries?
It was kind of an accident. So not to get too, I guess, too personal, but when George Floyd was killed, I looked at my wife and was like, "We got to try something different." Um,
Mm,
I've dealt with things in the U.S. being a black man all my life, right?
mhm.
And so that was kind of the tipping point. And so I said, let's a lot of even Canada, a lot of countries are not perfect, but I want to do something
Mhm,
different. And so we looked at other countries like New Zealand and Mexico, and we finally settled on Canada. And as I'm going through the immigration process, the process is a bit easier if you have a business formed. And so I was like, well, that's a growth opportunity there. So I started a branch in Canada, and it's just how it happened. And now we're trying to
mhm.
do the exact same things, make the same impact that we have in the US. So
And so are you then going to be living in Canada and just basically headquartering yourself in Canada and having the operations continue in the United States?
that's correct. So we've always been a virtual company. We've never had a physical office. So unless I told
Okay.
you, you wouldn't know that I live abroad. And honestly, I travel back and forth um, when required. So it's not
Mhm.
like I'm in some remote village where it takes 36 hours to get to where I need to.
I used to live in Alaska, and actually where I started my first business back in 2005. And yeah, getting to the lower 48 was a chore. It took a whole day to get pretty much anywhere past the West Coast. Because you had to go through Seattle or Portland, and there was always a long way over to get anywhere fast.
Mhm.
Those three major states on the West Coast there. Now it's a little easier. I live in south of Chicago now, so it's kind of crazy. They just took away one of our legs, and I'm finding myself in the same boat that I was when I was in Alaska. So it's kind of crazy. so, but anywho, where do you see yourself then? And I say you or the company, doesn't matter, one or both. In the next 3 to 5 years, where you want to take your company?
Honestly, just there's quite a few things that that we're focusing on, multifamily, especially affordable housing. It's just crazy how, especially during the pandemic, how much the housing cost has increased. but salaries haven't.
Mhm.
Um, and so we want to be on the front end of it. And it's not even necessarily a financial, like a money grab. It's trying to do something that's going to make a positive impact in the surrounding community.
Mhm.
And then also we're heavy in the EV space. So we do a lot of electrical vehicle infrastructure projects.
Mm.
And with the federal infrastructure bill, there's a lot of funds that are going towards that for every state to expand. Because I
Mhm.
think by, I forget what year it is, majority of cars will have to be electric vehicles. So we're tapping into that. We want to be a leader in both of those spaces. It's I wouldn't say it's a ton of MEP engineering firms, but there are quite a bit, and it's a good idea to kind of focus on things on a few things as opposed to a lot of things. Which by luckily we have an amazing team, and we've done almost everything except big stuff like stadiums and hospitals.
Gotcha. That's awesome. No, I think the focus is, especially in a new business, something that I don't think I did very well when I first started as a media production house. I started with audio production, and it wasn't quite enough to sustain, and so we grew into graphic design, web design. We ended up with a full print shop, CD and
Wow.
DVD duplication was big back then, the whole nine yards. And I feel like if I would have focused a little bit more on one or maybe three of the verticals,
Mhm.
audio, video, and maybe graphic design or something like that. That might have been a little different because there's a lot of overhead when you add that overhead and you add expense and you reduce efficiencies when you're trying to you know supply too many services at once. So I think you were smart in just focusing in on a core. It looks like you have three main cores there. That's which is awesome. And congratulations for you for recognizing the multifamily housing shortage that we have, especially in California. I grew up in Northern
Mhm.
California, so back then we didn't have that problem. It was there was always apartments going up, but there was a shortage. I want to say in 2008 is when it started, the housing shortage in on the West Coast. I don't know about the rest of the country, but it's amazing how far behind we've come. And companies like yours are very important in that process. People don't understand how much work it takes before the first ounce of concrete pours into the foundation of any structure. But I've,
Yeah.
I've been privileged to work with a lot of the whole gamut of companies that it takes to put up a structure in the United States. Do you find that doing business in Canada is different than in the United States?
I can only speak to Atlantic Canada, East Coast.
Okay.
It
Okay.
is different in that I was able to build Winston Engineering primarily on LinkedIn, to be honest with you, reaching out to a lot of folks directly, where I've noticed there a lot of people aren't on it or they just aren't active. And so
Mm,
a lot of the interactions are face to face, and a lot of the relationship building has taken place over a number of years. So a newbie coming in trying to break into that market has I mean, to be blunt, been very difficult because an architect may have a relationship with an engineering firm for 20, 30 years, or their brother-in-law owns it, right? So
right.
um, you have that, and then you also just have a lot less population. I mean, the entire country of Canada is a tenth of the size of the U.S., so it makes it a
About
little
35
bit
million.
difficult. Yeah, we're trying to
Mhm.
expand into Ontario. So, when people Toronto, that's mainly what
Mm,
people think of when they think of Ontario, which is a massive
sure.
city.
Right.
And there's just a lot more people in Ontario. So yeah, it's been interesting. It's been definitely a learning process. You have to kind of switch your mindset when it comes to marketing.
And when you're working, I mean, in the East Coast, you have a heavy French influence in there too. Do you find any cultural or language barriers that are happening on that side of the country?
No, not at all. If we were working in Quebec, maybe,
Okay.
but for the most part, a lot of folks still speak English. I think in Nova Scotia, there are a couple cities that have a lot of French or francophones, they're called, but no, that hasn't been an issue at all.
Yeah, I was just curious. I have a friend who lives in Ontario. Yeah, Ontario. He lives in Toronto, and he's bilingual. And so half the time, sometimes he slips into his French when he's trying to express certain things because he feels he can express them better in French than he can in English. I have to slow him down. I'm like, hey, Chris, it's like, wait, let's slow down here. What did that? What was that? I took a little bit of French in
Hmm.
high school, and that was a long time ago. So help me out here. So
Yeah,
that's
I
awesome.
took
That's great.
French.
So you have
I was gonna say I took French for a few years in high school, but I forgot most of it and relearned a little bit when I proposed to my wife, but now I've forgotten everything.
There you go. Well, that's very romantic to propose in French. I have a tendency to so growing up in California, you learn a little bit of Spanish, regardless of whether you try or not, and it's really Spanglish. And so I'll go from start in French, slip into Spanglish, and then end in English in one sentence. So it's one of those things I really need to just buckle down on one language and like learn it to basically unlearn all the bad language that I've pieced together from touring around the world.
Yep.
I've been to almost 30 countries now, so I learned just a little bit of everything as I go, just enough to, get you around, right?
Mhm.
So I find it interesting that you have a firm that is on the East Coast of Canada and your main branch is on the West Coast of the United States, which is very different, um, just cultures, really, to be honest with you. I mean, I've been all over the United States and I grew up on the West Coast and I always feel that like when I go to the East Coast, I have to shift my mindset in that. What does that can you share a little bit insight of how you um adjust your company culture to take into effect the fact that you have widely different types of businesses that you're working with on each of the coasts?
No, we have our own company culture that we don't necessarily adapt to other folks. We're very much a laid back company, and I have an amazing team. Um, and I try to make sure that they feel supported. And when people feel supported, they'll go to the ends of the earth to make projects happen. And I think because of that, whether a client is on the East Coast or the West Coast, they recognize that and they appreciate that. So our company culture, I think, is borderless. I think I'm a tag
Mm.
that, like, put that on the
Our company culture is
an
borderless,
advertisement.
a borderless culture. I love it.
There you go.
uh, that's awesome. I love that. I always tell people I've asked that question many times. It gets answered a lot of different ways. And as far as for me and my company is nationwide, from Alaska all the way down to Florida, and we run it every once in a while. We'll run into people who want us to, you know, curtail the way that we communicate to them, and it's unfortunate that they don't understand that, hey, listen, we're communicating in English. It's not a matter of anything that needs to be changed. It's there. And but I also see businesses where like, well, we'll make that small adjustment, but that creates an inefficiency because you have to make that consideration every single time. And that opens up so many possibilities of mistakes and just inefficiencies in a business. So I'm glad to hear that you're just staying true to yourself and allowing your business to do business with other folks that understand that and get it. I think that's really brave. You'd be surprised at how many people don't do that. So congratulations on that.
Yeah,
Got one more question for you.
thank you.
If you
Mhm.
could talk to yourself, so you started this in 2005 or 2015. So it was only 8 years ago. But how long before you started it did it take you to pull the trigger? When you first
So,
stood up in that cubicle, how many years was it between the cubicle and the Google, a search to start a business?
Cubicle was 2007, and
Okay.
Googling had 2014. And
Okay.
so,
So that took you 7 years, right?
yeah, And,
Yeah.
life happens.
Oh
At the
yeah.
time when I started the business, my wife was pregnant. So to come to her and say, hey, I want to quit my very stable job to start a business, it was not an easy conversation to have. But luckily, I put
Hmm.
the infrastructure in place to show that, hey, um, this is a viable business. And since then, we've
Hmm.
grown to the staff that we've had. We're licensed in 15 states in the U.S. So we work all over the U.S. In many different
Nice.
project types. So, but
Nice.
from the moment that it was a year long, it was a year process from the moment that I said, all right, I'm starting this firm to quitting
Hmm.
my job. So,
Gotcha. So what would you tell your former self 10 years ago, knowing what you know today? What would you tell that self?
I think if I was that honest with myself, I probably would not be an engineer, and not because engineering is not an amazing career. I think I would have opened myself up to other things. Like I love to cook. Maybe I would have became a chef. Um, I I travel a lot more now, and I wish I would have told my younger self, stop worrying about the money. Find you a cheap flight, sleep in an airport if you have to, but just get out there in the world. And you just said you've been to 30 different countries. When you go to other places, other countries, it sparks some type of other creativity. It shows you how other people live, and that may have enticed me to go different places. So I would have just told myself to not be so traditional and kind of just jump out there and be a nomad.
Love it. Love it. I really appreciate you taking the time today, Anthony. And to our listeners, if you enjoyed listening to this story here and it's inspired you for your business, make sure you click the subscribe button and give us a rating because that helps us get more listeners just like you to listen to these extraordinary entrepreneurs and listen to their stories and where we can all learn from it. So until the next time, stay extraordinary.